What's up, guys? We have been going through a series on how to witness. And I want to go ahead and warn you, this is going to be a longer video, and I don't plan on editing it, so you get the mistakes and the guffaws and all that all in one lump sum. And hopefully I can remain calm enough that I can keep my thoughts together and make this very beneficial. Guys, today I want to talk to you about witnessing in particular to that group of people who consider themselves atheist. Now, see, atheism is a very easy belief to kind of catch wind of and kind of get on the atheist side in their thinking, because they bring everything down to the physical level. They're like, listen, the material matter around us, that's all that there is, and there's nothing invisible. There's no spiritual world out there. And that seems like pretty good logic and pretty good rationale when you first get in this conversation. And if you're not used to conflict, and if you're not really used to witnessing to a person, when this comes up, you can be like stuck. And you're like, oh yeah, how do I prove that invisible things exist? And if you haven't prepared yourself and you haven't watched videos like this one and began to arm your mind with good reasons, you could be very stuck. But you have a solid foundation to stand upon. So here we go. We're going to dig in pretty deeply on how to minister to atheists. Now, one of the things I like to really dig into when I'm talking to an atheist is like, I start to get into the idea and the concept of right and wrong. Since the atheist believes there is no spiritual backdrop to this reality, there is no real reason to have right and wrong. And there should absolutely be no reason to have an absolute right and wrong. And just so you know, this is one of the reasons C.S. Lewis came to Christ, is because he, as he was looking at the universal code around the world, like when he found out that murder was considered wrong by every single culture, he's like, this is a universal, invisible spiritual law that we all abide by, so there must be some kind of reality behind this physical reality. So when I'm witnessing to an atheist, one of the things I like to do is bring up the concept of right and wrong. Where does it come from? Now, anybody that tries to reduce that, the atheist, if he goes, there is no spiritual realm, and if he goes, there is no right and wrong, if that is his response, you could immediately say, is that what you consider to be right? And then maybe in them, the wheels begin to turn. You see, you have to categorize things. If someone says there is no right and wrong, that is what they believe is a right statement. And if they go there, and if I say there is a right and wrong, they go, you are wrong. You see, they have brought everything back down again to the level of right and wrong. And no matter how hard I've tried to reason past this position, this is the position I always come to. It seems like a bedrock position to me. And I know a lot of other people that see this the same way. And it seems to be the platform we live from. So I like to begin to tackle that when I talk to atheists, and like, where does the idea of right and wrong come from? And point out that we absolutely do believe in right and wrong. And actually, Mr. Atheist, you yourself are living by some things that you believe to be right and wrong. And why are you doing that? Why are you living by some moral codes? The next thing I'd like to do is when I'm talking to an atheist, for an atheist to believe in physical things only, they basically only have one thing that they can ascribe to, and that is evolution. That things just spontaneously happened, that they just burst forth upon the scene, that they evolved, etc. And at this point, I want to tell you, you need to do some in-depth study on things that prove evolution to be false. There are websites in abundance, and books in abundance, and teaching in abundance, and Christian schools in abundance that will help you understand and get these facts to light. So when you are witnessing to an atheist and you ask them, how did we get here? What is all this for? Why do we have morals? And they're like, there's no morals. And then, well, how did we get here? And you'll say, by evolution. That's how we got here. And we're like, well, have you considered the problems with evolution, such as this, and this? And I'm not going to give you those in this video because that is huge in scope. But I'll tell you this, there are problems with everything. There are problems with the lineage of the animals. There are problems with the stars. There are problems with gravity. There are problems with light. If you believe in evolution, there are so many problems to overcome that you begin to see that it's a big myth and a big fairy tale. So I like to arm myself with that. And one of the things that really came to my mind is that, let's say I do believe in material matter. Let's say I was an atheist and I believed in matter only. Well, matter still abides by some laws, some invisible laws. And these quantum laws, where did they come from? Now, I have read behind some atheists, etc., that believe that these laws sprang into existence the same time matter did. But that just seems odd to me, that these invisible laws that govern how matter acts and reacts and how it functions, and the consistency of how matter always functions under these laws of nature, it just really made me go, where did these laws of nature come from? And when I began to see that the laws of nature, or that matter follows the laws of nature, I started asking, like, where did this come from? And where did this spectrum come from that matter got to pop into? So arm yourself with some evolutionary ammo to help decry, like, how many frauds there's been in the all these examples of missing links. Point out the frauds that have come up there, and then point out the holes in the records, etc. Another thing, when you're getting to the foundation of atheism, what these people lean upon, atheists don't realize that their starting point is actually one of faith, just like yours. So a lot of times an atheist will approach you and they'll attack your religion like, you just believe by faith. Well, in these things, you need to realize as a Christian, number one, yes, you do live by faith, but everybody lives by faith. The starting point is by faith. And I like to philosophically really boil this down for the atheist. I'm like, well, what's your name? They go, well, my name is so-and-so. Like, well, how did you come to that conclusion? Who are you? You are existing by faith. You have faith in your memories of who you are. You have faith that your senses are not lying to you. You actually have faith that logic that you are using to reason with is practical and consistent. You actually have faith that your intellectual capacity can process logic and the reality around you and your memory and your senses. You have faith that all of this is coming together well enough that you can trust it to live by. I really like to boil that down for an atheist when I'm talking to them, so that they know, yeah, as a Christian, yeah, I'm living by faith, absolutely. But so are you. And one of the places this can be seen in is, hey, Mr. Atheist, do you know how many of these scientists that you are trusting, these evolutionary scientists that you are trusting, you just have blindly trusted them? I want you to think back to your school textbooks, and a lot of times because we're a child, and we're young and we're naive and we're getting and receiving our education, we just have to trust our teachers, and we just trust that the textbooks are full of right, true, and proper and good information. So yes, I trust the Bible, but you trust by faith in your textbooks. And I like to press that a little further and say, out of some of the scientific papers that I have read by evolutionists, they sure trust each other a lot. I personally, I remember reading a paper on the uh, rhythmites and varves, I think it was, the lunar cycle and how it affects these layers that are in riverbanks and on the edge of large streams, etc. And I think it's called Rhythmites and Varves. And there was a 60-page paper on it, and I read about it. And at the end, even though this guy hadn't said anything exact, because he can't make an exact claim because it's an evolutionary claim, it's a speculative claim, he said, well, besides, we can trust the geologist. That was the end of this fantastic science paper, is like, we know this is true because of geology. I trust geologists. That's not okay. Just because one scientist trusts another scientist doesn't tell us that the evolutionary science is true. Also, when I am trying to witness to an atheist, one of the things I like to get into is that, yes, we worship an unseen God. And yes, we worship a God that we can't touch or interact with, etc. But you as an atheist, you worship things too. And one of the things that you worship in particular is logic. You worship logic, and they do. Most atheists have an intellectual flavor to them, and they like to logically boil everything down and read heavy books, and they all like to attack God, etc. But they trust logic. And so I like to start bringing the comparison here. I'm like, logic, you can't see logic. And you can't touch logic. And you can't taste it. You can't smell it. And you can't feel it. Now, you can use it to put things together, and you can see the outcomes of it, and you can have faith that, hey, this makes sense. But we begin to worship this invisible reality called logic. What is the difference between that and worshiping a God who fits all those parameters as well? And especially as a Christian, as a follower of Christ, we actually worship a God that has revealed himself, and he came down here and lived and died and rose again to prove that he was God. So also, when I am witnessing to an atheist, one of the things I like to bring up too is, some of these invisible things. They only want to talk about the everything being physical, and because when you start getting into invisible things, then if there's any credibility there, then there might be credibility that God exists, and we got to stay away from that. So I like to ask them questions about math. I'm like, math is exquisite and precise and mysterious and complicated and consistent throughout the universe. And whether I understand it or not, it still functions perfectly. And the more complex I learn how to interact with it, it always behaves as it should. Where did this concept of math come from? I also like to point back to the thing of, you're worshiping this invisible logic, but what are the rules of logic that are just so consistent, and where did they come from, and how are they always so perfect and good and right if you truly follow laws of logic? If logic is invisible and solid, maybe God is invisible and solid. And then what about beauty? Beauty doesn't make any sense in a world of survival of the fittest. It doesn't serve any purpose except to feed the deeper intrinsic qualities of man. And so I like to ask them, like, well, can you describe beauty for me? And can you tell me what its purpose is? And let's dive into that a little bit. When witnessing to an atheist also, one of the things that it's easy to point out a lot of times is like, why are you so angry about a God who does not exist? Or why are you so purposeful on destroying the church who believes in a God? It's almost as if you're angry at a person. Like, it is very hard to be angry at Santa Claus because he does not exist. How are you going to manifest that anger against him? How How are you going to be perpetually mad at Santa Claus? Now, you could be mad at people about Santa Claus, but if you get into some deep atheist arguments, you will find that they have emotional hang-ups with God. They are angry with God. And so when you begin to dive in that a little further, you begin to find that there was some kind of emotional event happened in their life. And a lot of times you can even ask the question, well, who hurt you, or when did you get hurt? A lot of times it's by Christians. And how did God disappoint you? If I remember right, something like that happened in Brad Pitt's life. He was like, I don't like God because of this. And there was this one girl that I was witnessing to at one point, and she was talking about her atheism. And I was like, well, when did you get hurt? And she said, when I prayed to God to save my dad from dying, and he died anyway. So at the bottom of all of this logic, there's usually an emotional hang-up. And if you actually approach an atheist with kindness and love and tenderness, and you actually engage them personally, instead of just trying to beat them in an argument or a fight, when you begin to engage them on that personal level, a lot of times they will divulge these emotional hang-ups to you and give you a chance to work with it. It is also, this is just a kind of a cliche argument that Christians go to a lot of times when you're witnessing to atheists, but you can respond with, there are no atheists in foxholes. This is seen time and time again. People get out on the battlefield and they begin to fight, and the crisis arises in them, and all of a sudden they have a need for God like they have never needed God. And you don't just see this out on the battlefield, you actually see this in people in crisis situations. If you'll watch crisis footage of the news, people tend to get very religious. After 9/11 happened here in America, after 9/11, everybody, I mean just about everybody, was talking about God for weeks and months on end. Everybody got religious again. And if we got religious again, maybe it's because deep down inside of our created souls, we have a need for God. I've also noticed that one of the most atheistic people of all time, Voltaire, as he died, was screaming in pains of agony. And it wasn't from pain, from what people around him were saying. It was like because he was experiencing hell and going towards that awful, dreadful place, and was experiencing this like you don't see. And that's technically not proof of anything, but I think it's rather interesting that somebody that claimed to be such a hardcore atheist on the verge of his deathbed, instead of nothing happening, something terrible began to happen to him as he crossed over. And I don't think that's good, and I'm not happy about that. But how ironic. How ironic. If there's nothing but material matter and you're just passing into non-existence, why did that even matter? I think you should also know that as you're trying to witness to an atheist, you need to understand there is a difference between types of atheists. There are atheists that have kind of adopted that position so they can live as they want to. There are some atheists that are truly looking to see if there is a God. But then you also have the embittered and angry and mean and spiteful atheist, and you need to know who you are dealing with as you begin to witness to them. And you need to start making this assessment early on, because if you run into the embittered atheist, maybe the one that was a Christian and has turned from the faith, and now they are actually a condemned soul walking planet Earth, your encounter with them is not going to get any better. And it doesn't matter how much you witness to this person, because they have pulled away. The book of Hebrews says there is no way for them to be saved, so you are actually wasting your time. And some of these people want to argue and fight with Christians, and they just want to destroy your faith, and they will spend as long as it takes to try to plant some kind of doubt in you, or to try to mock you, or to hurt you in some fashion. You need to know, as you're witnessing to an atheist, is that the type of atheist you're witnessing to, or are you witnessing to an atheist that hasn't really had good presentations of the gospel, hasn't had good foundations and logic to lead them? Because that sort of atheist has a chance of becoming a Christian, whereas the embittered atheist, you might as well just move on, and move on rather quickly. I already mentioned this, but you should build a relationship with the atheist that you are witnessing to. You need to let them see God in you. They actually need to touch base with the love that is flowing out of your heart. They need to experience the love of Christ. As you are witnessing to them, they have often, as we mentioned earlier, been hurt deeply in some fashion. And it is often not the logic that ever reaches out to them. It is often the love that reaches to them. And here's, let's say you're an atheist for a second. In my opinion, I think there are very few true atheists. And when you press them on this, eventually they kind of concede. And if you get in deep and personal, most of them kind of admit, well, I know, but I don't want to admit to there being a God. And reason being, because then they become accountable. Then they have to change their life, etc. So most of them know, but they put up an atheist front. So deep down, they're just going to keep the logic out because of emotional reasons. And so if you can't reach them logically, it makes more sense to reach them emotionally. It makes sense to love them and break down those barriers. We also see that you're not trying to win a fight with an atheist, like who can come up with the best logic and who's got the best presentation and who is going to dominate in this role. No. Share with them the truth you know. Share with them the foundation you know. And the more you study apologetics and the defense of the faith, and the more you dig into philosophy as compared to the Bible, you will see that we stand on absolutely solid ground. I stand on the solid ground of faith and proof. And when you stand on that, the atheist is usually just standing on faith. And they don't have proof that God does not exist. They're kind of taking a let's wait and see position. So you're not trying to beat them in a fight. You're actually trying to share with them. And one of the things about this is if you throw everything you know about how real God is at a person or at an atheist in a fight, number one, they're going to think you're arguing with them to be right. And that's not good. But if you will share with them point by point, maybe over a stretch of time, if you will share with them a little bit at a time and give them time to digest some of what you're saying, then it begins to do, let's say, a deeper work. Oftentimes we think, well, my number one argument didn't work, so let's go to my number two argument. All right, number two didn't work, let's go to number three. And you kind of throw it in. And there's times you might have to do that because let's say you're waiting on a flight somewhere and you know this person's going to leave forever, so you just want to give them as much information as possible. I endorse that. But maybe with your friends that you're trying to reach, don't beat them up with Christianity or God logic. Why don't you give them bits and pieces at a time? Like, hey, have you thought about this? Have you really just kind of pondered this? And let's also remember that in dealing with an atheist, it doesn't matter if you present them good, right, true, and absolutely perfect logic. They have a free will. They can simply choose to reject it. A lot of times we can get so frustrated with I've presented them with the exact truth and I came up with I read 2 or 3 more books and I came up with so much more information and I've given them everything's right and they just won't make the right decision. You need to realize that they are fallen creatures with a free will and they can choose. They can just simply choose not to accept. And that'll take some of that burden off of you. And know this, that as an atheist is talking with you, that they don't have the same moral code that you do to abide by. And I'm not questioning this. I just want you to be aware of this. That they don't have to tell you the truth about their positions or what they really believe. It is not at all unsurprising that an atheist would lie or hide certain information when you're witnessing to them. Oftentimes later, after an atheist converts, they were like, yeah, I knew about 2 conversations in that you were right and I was wrong, but I really, stretched it out and I kind of chose my free will and just kind of lived as I wanted to, but I knew better. So if you're aware that your job is to speak for the Lord, that your job is to plant seed and let God do the transformation, it makes it so much easier when you're witnessing to those that claim that God does not exist.